Saudia Flight 163 was operated by Saudi Arabian Airlines on the evening of Tuesday, August 19, 1980, using a Lockheed L-1011-200 TriStar, registration HEA, a wide-body, long-range trijet that was considered among the safest and most technologically sophisticated commercial aircraft of its era. The L-1011 was equipped with advanced autopilot systems, automated warning logic and modern fire detection systems, but it still relied heavily on strict crew discipline and immediate procedural compliance in emergency situations, especially fires. The flight was scheduled to operate from Karachi, Pakistan to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia with an intermediate stop in Riyadh, carrying a mix of Saudi nationals, expatriate workers, families and children returning home. The first leg from Karachi to Riyadh was entirely routine, with no reported mechanical abnormalities, no warning indications and no irregular passenger or cargo issues. Upon arrival in Riyadh, the aircraft was serviced normally. Passengers disembarked, new passengers boarded and cargo and baggage were loaded into the lower cargo holds, including the aft C3 cargo compartment, located beneath the rear cabin floor. This compartment was sealed, inaccessible in flight, and protected only by smoke detection and limited fire suppression systems designed to delay, not extinguish, fires. At the time, cargo screening standards were far less stringent than today, and items such as flammable materials, chemicals, or improperly packed goods could pass through without detection. There is no evidence that the crew was informed of any hazardous cargo on board, and the aircraft was dispatched as airworthy. At approximately 21:08 local time, Flight 163 departed Riyadh bound for Jeddah. The takeoff roll, rotation and initial climb were normal. Weather conditions were stable, visibility was good, and air traffic control communications were routine. For the first few minutes after departure, there were no signs of distress. However, approximately 6 to 7 minutes after takeoff, while the aircraft was climbing through roughly 20,000 feet, a smoke warning light illuminated in the cockpit, indicating smoke detected in the aft cargo compartment. This warning was generated by optical smoke sensors designed to detect particulate matter in the air, and in aviation doctrine, a cargo smoke warning is treated as a time-critical emergency because such fires can escalate rapidly and invisibly. Shortly after the warning light illuminated, cabin crew reported smelling smoke in the passenger cabin, particularly toward the rear of the aircraft. This indicated that the fire was already producing enough smoke to migrate from the cargo compartment into the occupied cabin, which should have signaled an escalating and dangerous situation. The flight engineer was sent to physically investigate the cabin. Upon returning, he confirmed the presence of smoke and worsening conditions near the rear galley, but he could not visually access the cargo hold itself. At this point, the crew correctly decided to return to Riyadh, which was the nearest suitable airport. However, what followed was a series of procedural delays and incomplete emergency execution that would ultimately doom everyone on board. Rather than initiating the most aggressive fire response available, such as an immediate descent, emergency landing configuration and full cabin preparation, the aircraft remained airborne for approximately 15 additional minutes. Some of this time was spent managing fuel weight and coordinating with air traffic control, but during this period the fire continued to burn unchecked in the sealed cargo compartment. The L-1011's fire suppression system could slow combustion but not stop it, and as materials burned, they produced large quantities of carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide, and superheated smoke, which began to seep into the cabin through ventilation ducts, floor voids and structural gaps. Oxygen masks were not deployed and passengers were not instructed to brace or prepare for evacuation, suggesting that the cabin crew themselves may not have fully understood the severity of the situation. At approximately 21:36, Saudia Flight 163 landed safely back at Riyadh International Airport. The landing was smooth and controlled with no mechanical failure, no loss of directional control, and no visible external fire at touchdown. Fire and rescue services were already positioned along the runway, expecting the aircraft to stop immediately and evacuate on the runway, which is standard global procedure for onboard fire emergencies. At this exact moment, the disaster was still completely survivable. However, instead of stopping, the captain allowed the aircraft to continue taxiing. The aircraft remained in motion for approximately 2 minutes and 40 seconds, exiting the runway and proceeding onto a taxiway. This decision forced emergency vehicles to reposition and introduced a critical delay during which the internal fire continued to intensify. When the aircraft finally stopped on the taxiway, the crew still did not order an evacuation. No evacuation command was given, no doors were opened, and no escape slides were deployed. Even more critically, the engines were left running for more than 3 minutes, creating a jet blast hazard that prevented firefighters from approaching the aircraft. The aircraft also remained pressurized, making door operation slower and more complex. Inside the cabin, smoke density increased rapidly, visibility dropped to near zero, and toxic gas concentrations rose to lethal levels. Investigators later determined that most passengers would have lost consciousness within minutes, seated upright and restrained, without any opportunity to escape. Only after the engines were finally shut down could rescue crews approach. However, by then the internal environment of the aircraft had become unsurvivable. Approximately 23 minutes after the aircraft had come to a stop, firefighters managed to open the R2 door on the right side of the fuselage. Upon opening the door, they encountered a silent, smoke-filled cabin with extreme heat and no signs of movement. Every passenger and crew member was found still in their seats, indicating that no evacuation attempt had ever been initiated. Moments later, a flash fire erupted inside the cabin, fully engulfing the interior and confirming that the fire had reached full structural involvement. Post-accident investigation and forensic autopsies revealed one of the most haunting findings in aviation history. Every single person on board died from smoke inhalation, not from burns, impact trauma, or structural collapse. This conclusively demonstrated that no one died during the flight or landing itself. All deaths occurred on the ground while the aircraft sat intact. The fire was traced to the aft C3 cargo compartment, but despite extensive investigation, the exact ignition source was never definitively identified, leaving possibilities such as improperly declared hazardous cargo, electrical failure, or spontaneous combustion. The official accident report identified the primary causes as failure to initiate immediate evacuation, delayed engine shutdown, inadequate crew coordination, and failure to recognize the time-critical nature of onboard fires, rather than any fundamental aircraft defect. Saudia Flight 163 stands today as one of the clearest and most tragic demonstrations in aviation history that a survivable emergency can become fatal through delay alone. It remains the deadliest accident involving a Lockheed L-1011, the deadliest aviation disaster in Saudi Arabian history, and one of the most studied cases of human factor failure in emergency management. The disaster fundamentally reinforced a core aviation principle that is now taught worldwide. In an aircraft fire, landing the airplane is not enough. Every second after touchdown determines who lives and who dies. If you want, I can expand further into a second-by-second timeline, a psychological analysis of cockpit decision-making, or a comparison with other fire-survivable accidents that ended differently.